Welcome to Discovering True Health, where our goal is to provide you with cutting-edge health information through research, interviews with experts, and personal journeys to true health. Our message is a message of hope and healing, and our mission is to bring you on a journey to discovering true health, to not only find wellness, but to thrive.
Hello, everyone. It's Marianne Kehoe here with my co-host Christy, and welcome to Discovering True Health, your weekly deep dive into health and wellness.
Thank you so much for being here. If you are watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. You can also check out our website for additional information. If you have any questions for us, have a health journey you'd like to share, or a topic you'd love to learn more about, you can reach us on our Instagram or Facebook page. We check them regularly. We'd love to hear from you, and all those links are below.
And just a reminder, we are not your doctors, so please do not take this as medical advice. If you have specific questions about your specific case or your health care, feel free to reach out to your own practitioner. Okay, Christy, let's dive into today's topic. Today, we will be talking about your personal battle and healing journey through COVID. So let's get into it. You got COVID back in March of 2020 and were one of the first 25,000 people in the US to get this.
I was, and back then there was very little information out there mainstream. Where do you go? What do you do? I remember when the health department called and told me I was positive, I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? And they said, just stay at home in quarantine unless you feel like you need to go to the hospital. And by that time I was already pretty sick. So my friend and I, who I was quarantined with, were really scrambling on, social media and, online to find any sort of information we could to help us beat this and get through it.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. How did you get exposed to COVID?
So I was in very close quarters with somebody who had a high fever, and then several days later they tested positive for COVID. And I was also around a group of people who had been traveling outside the country. And then several days after I was around them, a number of them did get pretty sick and test positive for COVID. So I had multiple exposures in, close contact.
Okay. And how long after being exposed did you notice the symptoms, and what were your exact symptoms?
So it was about 3 days after exposure, I started feeling like I was having a sinus infection coming on. And I did feel like a very slight heaviness in my chest. So day 4, the following day, I contacted a doctor, did a tele-appointment. And since it was the beginning of the pandemic and I was feeling sick, I was like, hey, can I get a COVID test? And he was kind of laughed it off and was like, well, you don't have fever, you don't have any major respiratory issues that you're displaying. So no, you don't need one of those. And, gave me a prescription for Z-Pak and prednisone. And just so everybody remembers, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was no drive-through testing. You just had to go through a doctor, and they had to either, refer or prescribe you to get a test.
Well, and Christy, as long as I've known you, you've been so healthy and active. So just a note, do you have any underlying health issues?
So I did have asthma as a child, which I grew out of as an adult. So I haven't really had any issues with it as an adult. And I actually really have a lot of questions around that question. Why do some only get mild symptoms? Some get, the life-threatening respiratory stuff, and some are exposed and they don't get it at all. And, all different age ranges. I've had experience in kind of all of those scenarios, personal experiences, and it's kind of something I'd really love to get to the bottom of and understand.
Well, I agree. And I know people in their 60s that are my age and had it mildly, and younger people like you who had it severely. Well, add it to our list of research topics for a future show. Okay, so you finally got tested at a drive-through test site in Nevada, and you tested positive.
Yes, so I finally got tested. It was day 5. My friend and I decided to leave LA and go out to Nevada because her family lived out there. I was feeling much worse by then, terrible headache. My sinuses were completely shut down. My lungs were getting a lot heavier and it was getting a lot harder to breathe. So we got tested that day, and then it was day 8. The health department called me and told me I was positive.
And at this point, were you taking any medication?
Yeah, so I actually owned a nebulizer, and I had vials of albuterol, which were from a previous bronchitis bout that I had. So when my lungs started getting heavier, I did, try to take one of those, because normally a quarter of a vial or a half a vial would make me breathe just fine. I would be much better after that, but I tried an entire vial, didn't really do anything, which was kind of shocking. And then also all the natural stuff. So I was doing the vitamin C, the zinc, the vitamin D, ginger, turmeric tea. And then I'd also done the Z-Pak and prednisone from the first doctor when I thought it was just a sinus infection. So, but yeah, none of that was helping or really doing anything.
Wow. And buterol is what is given to asthma patients for asthma attacks. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So just to give a couple details of what albuterol is, it's a bronchial dilator, and it relaxes the smooth muscles in the airways to allow the airflow to flow in and out easier. So for that not to work was, was really, really shocking and scary. So then over the next couple of days, the next 3 days, my lungs really spiraled downwards really quickly. They went from, heavy and pretty bad to scary. And it was day 13. I woke up early that morning, really struggling to breathe. Sinuses were completely shut down. I would take a couple steps and I would get dizzy. So I knew my oxygen levels were low. That day was a really big day I'll never forget, because it was, the day I really felt that if I didn't get help in the next day or two, I probably wouldn't make it.
I can't believe that must have been so scary for you. Did you call a doctor or go to a hospital at that point?
Yeah, so I immediately after I woke up, I did call one of those at-home services, which my mom had given me a number to, explained to them everything. And they said, sorry, you have COVID. It's too dangerous for us to come there. Told me to go to the hospital. And then I called the urgent care immediately after, where they had done the drive-through testing where I tested positive. And they said the same thing. Sorry, you can't come here. You have COVID, go to the hospital. While I was on the phone with them, I did ask them for a prescription of hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak combo, because we had seen somebody who had posted something that, they had COVID quite bad, quite life-threatening, and they had done Z-Pak, hydroxychloroquine with some other things, and it helped them get better pretty quickly. So I wanted to try that to see if it would work for me. The doctor refused to give it to me, actually, and said, we're only giving this to people, COVID patients that are almost dying, which of course I was like, look, I'm gasping for breath. I'm really struggling to breathe. In a couple of days, I'll probably be almost dying. So I'd like to avoid that. But yeah, they wouldn't give it to me, but she did agree to give me vials of budesonide, which is a steroid that I could take with my nebulizer. So I got off the phone with them, still pretty frustrated and, scared, like feeling like I was really on my own in this. And my friend's mom called us, and she had seen on Facebook a doctor they knew, Dr. West, and he had posted an article on a prescription he felt could really help COVID patients who were getting the lung issues. So we contacted him immediately. He actually got on the phone with me immediately and listened to my symptoms, got me information. And he's like, look, you are in serious condition. You need to get on this right away. So he had some at his office. My friend's mom went and grabbed it and brought it to me. And I got on that medication right away, which was called respiratory. So I started taking it pretty immediately that day.
Wow. So first the doctor refused to give you a COVID test. And then the next two said, go to the hospital, and would not give you therapeutic medications. And why did you not go to the hospital after being told by two doctors to go?
I just felt in my own inner authority that it was the wrong place to be. I had a virus, and hospitals are for broken bones and heart surgeries. And also I had seen, from my research and on television, that hospitals, really what they were doing was just intubating COVID patients. And for my research, it didn't seem like that was the right thing to do. And I was really determined to find a better way of, beating it.
But you did end up going to the hospital that evening.
I did, very reluctantly. So Dr. West called me that day every hour, checked on me. He was amazing. Called me that evening and was like, look, your lungs are still pretty bad. I want you to go to the hospital just to get an x-ray. You're not going to stay there. I need to be sure you aren't getting a secondary infection like pneumonia, because if that's the case, I need to treat you completely differently. So while you're there, also ask them to give you a prescription for resipinephrine, because he had just given me whatever he had on hand in his office. So, I very reluctantly said I would go. And also just to note, that day, I had been taking the respiratory along with the albuterol and budesonide, and the combination of those three gave me about a 4-hour window of being able to breathe a lot better and not, complete panic, gasping for breath. So that was really great. So yes, very reluctantly that evening, I did go to the hospital.
Thank you for doing that. How did the hospital visit go? And did they give you the medications that you needed at that point?
So the visit definitely confirmed my hesitancy being correct. So luckily the x-ray came out fine. I was not developing any secondary infections at that time. I did ask for the prescription of resipinephrine, and the ER doctor actually laughed at me, and she's like, oh, I'm not going to give you a prescription of that. It's for kids with croup. And I was like, exactly.
Hello.
Yeah. So yes, wouldn't give me that. And she also said, look, the reason you can't breathe is because you have COVID, and all we can really do for you is intubate you once your lungs get worse. So I was like, thanks for the x-ray, but I have a doctor taking care of me, so I'm going to be leaving now.
So you went home and you continued taking the resipinephrine daily.
Resipinephrine, yes.
Resipinephrine. I know I can't help that. Hey, I'm lucky I got that much out. Did the resipinephrine help?
Yeah, it absolutely did. So my lungs went from spiraling downhill really, really quickly over those 3 days, and they stabilized and slowly started getting better. And it was about the 3rd day of being on it that I really noticed, a huge difference.
And how often were you taking it?
So I was taking 1 vial of each medication in the order of albuterol, budesonide, and resipinephrine 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. And just to give a quick little, breakdown of what those are, again, we said albuterol before, but it's smooths the muscles in the airway to allow the air to flow in and out easier. Then the budesonide is a corticosteroid, and it is anti-inflammatory. And the resipinephrine assists the body in decreasing inflammation, and it also leads to fluid reabsorption. And it is also used in hospitals for patients with moderate to severe respiratory distress.
Okay, yes, thank you for sharing that part. But then about a week into being on the lung treatments, you had another big scare.
Yeah, so with COVID, the other big danger that can be life-threatening is, well, besides drowning on your own lung fluid, is if you get a secondary infection because your respiratory system is so compromised. So I was on the breathing medication about a week. My lungs weren't getting any worse. They had incrementally got better. They were still heavy though, still getting the extreme exhaustion, the headaches and the body aches, still had all that going on. And it was about day 20 and my trachea starts swelling shut. So we rushed in to see Dr. West, and he diagnosed me with tracheitis, a secondary acute upper respiratory bacterial infection.
Wow. Okay. So at that point, you've been sick for 20 days, body aches, bad headache, sinuses shut down, and your lungs almost shut down now. Extreme exhaustion on top of everything else. You finally got on a medication to stabilize your lungs, and now your throat is swelling shut. I mean, what did your doctor do at this point?
Yeah, it was a lot. That was a tough time.
Yeah,
and also, just before I answer that, so everybody understands, I was Dr. West's first adult patient. He's a pediatrician, so I was kind of the guinea pig for this whole treatment protocol. And he had actually started seeing COVID cases in children back in 2019, and was kind of baffled by it. He'd ask the parents, "Hey, have you traveled out of the country at all?" And they'd be like, "No." And was kind of confused why these children, were getting COVID. So he had established a treatment protocol with the children, and I had, come along. So I was his first adult patient at that time trying this out. Also to note that at that time, back in March, April of 2020, the CDC was not authorizing steroids and certain medications to be used on COVID patients for whatever reason. And they did finally reverse that. I think it was about 6 months later in August of 2020. And they finally authorized certain steroids and medications, like the one that actually helped save my life, dexamethasone. They started, authorizing it. And then, but I do have a lot of questions around that as well. I mean, how did the CDC come to that conclusion? It was the beginning of the pandemic. It just started. How did they,
rule it out?
They, block all those different medications? How did they know, where did they get this information from? Also, these are medications too that don't really have any major side effects, and they've been around for many, many years. And it really, it really devastates me, because I was lucky enough to get treated the way I got treated. And I know so many people, because of, not being able to get the medications I got, didn't get them and didn't make it. And it's hard, and it's frustrating. Also, just to understand this whole process, I'm kind of living in real time at that time. You got the CDC not authorizing medications that were successful, including the dexamethasone that saved my life. Then you have the urgent cares and the family doctors that kind of didn't want to touch the COVID patients, and like, no, go to the hospital, so you're funneling all the, really critically ill people or not critically ill people to hospitals. And then the hospitals are strictly following the CDC guidelines. And, the patients there aren't able to get these, these treatments that really, really work. So this was something that I was seeing as I was in the middle of it all.
Oh gosh, I mean, you think back on it, it's like so many people could have been saved back then if they had been treated with the proper medications. I mean, and this is the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. This is what they're supposed to be experts in. Ugh. Okay, let's go back to your throat swelling shut.
Right. So the day we got there, Dr. West sat me down. He's like, look, I can treat you, the way the current CDC guidelines are saying to treat COVID patients, but I don't think that that's going to work. Or I can treat you the way that I've been treating a lot of the children with COVID. And, I feel like that will be successful and really help you. Of course, it wasn't a big, hard decision. Again, trying those medications weren't going to hurt me,
Right.
So of course I was like, do what you feel like you need to do in order to, get me better.
Exactly. I mean, and up to this point, it sounds like you had so many doctors either saying they couldn't help you, or this is all we can do. To finally find a doctor that was acting out of urgency certainly must have been a huge relief to you.
Yeah, it was. And I remember at one point early on, Dr. West must have seen the terror in my eyes, and he looked at me, he's like, I promise I'm not going to let you die. And he kept that promise, and I believed him. And yeah, he's brilliant and amazing, and I'm so grateful for him.
Well, he sounds like a really amazing doctor. So how did he treat the tracheitis?
So we did 5 days of injections back to back of a really strong steroid and antibiotic, the antibiotic ceftriaxone and the steroid dexamethasone. By day 2 of the injections, I woke up at about 5 a.m. and my body just started purging all the liquid in my lungs. I must have coughed for about 5 hours straight, which that was another huge moment I'll never forget, because at that moment, I had never, the liquid had never came out of my lungs or on my body. So I knew at that moment, like, I'm gonna live. I'm gonna beat this. So after the first round, we took a 5-day break, and then we did 4 more days of injections back to back. And by the final round of injections, my breathing was a lot better. The liquid in my lungs were minimized, and I still had the extreme fatigue and a lot of the other symptoms, but those obviously would take time, to kind of disperse, and my body needed to heal from the extreme kind of sickness I had. But at that point in time, I was no longer at risk from COVID in a life-threatening way.
Oof. how long were you in critical condition? And you haven't mentioned it yet, and I've been meaning to ask this. Did you have a fever at all during this time?
Good question. So I was extremely sick for about 46 days. I finally tested negative 46 days later, which I did have another, in the beginning, the CDC, when they told me I was positive, I asked them, I was like, hey, how do I know when I'm no longer, positive and can't spread this to anybody else? I don't want to go around my friends' parents and kill them.
Yeah, good idea.
So they basically just said, look, just, a couple days after, about 3 days after your symptoms are gone, you're no longer contagious, which I was like, you know what, I want to know for myself. So I tested periodically, and it took about, by the 46th day, I finally tested negative. So I thought that was interesting. And it was probably, I'd say 25 to 30 days. I was like red zone sick. And then also about the fever, I never had a fever. I documented my temperature actually 3 times a day. My friend helped me out because we wanted to keep track of it. My temperature actually went lower while I was really sick. It went down to 97. And then as I got better, incrementally went higher. So by the time I was pretty much better, it was about back to normal, 98.8. So that was pretty interesting. And I know other people that never had fevers. And I know some people that did have fevers. So.
Wow, I find that quite interesting because we heard the fever was a symptom. And a lot of places, like myself, we were testing temperatures at the doors before you could enter. Oof, okay, well, let's talk briefly about how COVID-19 can be life-threatening for some, which is what you experienced, and how it severely affected your respiratory system. I think I would like the people to understand all about this. I mean, it's quite interesting the way you explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It is so important because that's kind of how I understood, how are you getting oxygen, what was happening in my body, and how, what treatments were right. So Dr. Seheult and Dr. Pierre Kory have both put together some really great research explaining how COVID affects the respiratory system.
Which is excellent. And not everyone that has gotten COVID has had major respiratory issues. We should make that clear.
Exactly. So Dr. Roger Seheult breaks it down like this. The coronavirus is life-threatening by something called ARDS, acute respiratory syndrome. But let's first understand how the kind of basic lung function works and how we get oxygen.
Okay, so I'm going to be referencing the study done by Dr. Roger Seheult. Okay, he says it like this. You have an airway that then divides into right and left main stem bronchus, which then divide into right and left upper and lower and middle lobes. And then they again divide into much smaller bronchi, like branches on a tree.
And then at the end of each branch, there are alveoli, which are tiny grape-like structures, kind of similar to the leaves on a tree. And when we breathe air, which contains oxygen, it travels down the airway through the bronchi and fills the alveoli. Now, the membrane of the alveoli is very thin because the oxygen the alveoli is now filled with has to diffuse into the deoxygenated blood as it flows by. So the deoxygenated blood flows by the alveoli and picks up the oxygen. And now the oxygenated blood flows back to the heart and the rest of the body. And that's kind of the basic, simplistic version of how you get oxygen.
Okay, and also, so what happens with COVID when it affects the lungs? So with an illness, for example, like pneumonia, only one particular branch of the lung will swell and become inflamed. Kind of like when you smash your finger in the door and it swells and there is inflammation. The inflammation causes a leakage of fluid into the body, into the tissue space.
But with COVID, instead of just one portion of your lungs getting inflamed, the entire lung gets inflamed all at once. And like you said, in your example of smashing your finger, the inflammation in your lung does 3 things. 1, it causes the alveoli membrane to thicken, so it's difficult for the oxygen to get in and out. And 2, the fluid fills the interstitial space between the alveoli and the bloodstream. Again, the oxygen's not able to oxygenate the blood. And 3, the capillaries become leaky and the fluid starts leaking into the alveoli and starts filling them up with liquid, preventing oxygen from getting into the bloodstream. So you're basically drowning on your own lung fluid from the inside, which is absolutely terrifying from my experience.
I would say so, yes. So because of this, you will have a hard time breathing and the body will get to a point where it's lacking enough oxygen in the tissues to sustain bodily functions.
And what needs to happen very quickly at this point is for the swelling and inflammation to go away, which will in turn cause the buildup of fluid to go away as well. And then you'll be able to get the oxygen back to your tissues and organs.
So it is also crucial to monitor and treat any secondary infections that may happen while the lungs are in this delicate state.
And now we have some research from Dr. Pierre Kory. He's done a tremendous amount of studies and research, but we're just going to give you a tiny little part here. He states that COVID in the lungs act as organizing pneumonia, which cause acute respiratory failure.
And what is organizing pneumonia? Okay, this is from the mayoclinic.org. Organizing pneumonia is when the tiny air exchange sacs, the alveoli, and the walls of the small bronchi become inflamed and plugged with connective tissue.
So from both of these doctors' research and studies, the danger from COVID stems from inflammation.
Which is why the treatment Dr. West gave you worked, as it was all about reducing inflammation quickly and treating the secondary infection your body developed. So basically treating the symptoms of COVID to allow the body to heal itself.
Yes, quickly and aggressively.
Absolutely. And Christy, I want to ask you, how are you feeling now? I know it's been 15 months since you contracted this. Do you still have any lingering symptoms or health issues?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I've been struggling with the long hauler stuff. So I still currently have fatigue. My energy is not back to normal. So I'm kind of limited to what I can do. And I'm not back to normal. I also have decreased lung capacity from the lung damage and the microvascular damage. And also my immune system is still pretty delicate, got pretty beat up in the whole thing. My last lung capacity test was around 60%. That was about a month and a half ago, but I am doing much better than I was. And I have started a new treatment protocol, which has helped my long hauler symptoms minimize. I'm really excited about that. And we'll get to that in another episode, but I'm also so grateful I'm alive. I'm, grateful to Dr. West for all his knowledge and everything he did.
Well, we are definitely grateful to Dr. West. And after treating you, you shared with me, he has gone on to treat successfully over 300 adults with the same protocol.
Yes, he has. I was just talking to them about a month and a half ago, and him and his nurse were telling me back in October, November, December, they were getting about 30 to 40 COVID patients a day that they were treating. And it's worked across the board, with people with obese, people with underlying symptoms. He told me a story about a woman who had been actually in the hospital a couple, I think 10 days, and she wasn't getting better and wasn't getting the treatment. So, came to him, and she's doing much better now as well. So yeah, his protocols worked right across the board. And also, I think what he said, he's tweaked it. So since now we don't have the CDC guidelines have changed, and, since I was a guinea pig and he's seen that it's all worked on me, now the protocol is a little different, where he gives the antibiotic and steroid, a lot quicker if anybody displays any, major, lung issues. And also to note, we did do a case study with me, and my friend at the time had helped me keep a spreadsheet with the medications and symptoms and improvements daily. And then Dr. West did a whole write-up, and he submitted all that to a large network of doctors and also the CDC and the WHO.
Yes, and I was sad and shocked when you told me that he got negative feedback from that, right?
Yeah, apparently he was ridiculed and got a lot of backlash at the time. He also had posted my story on Facebook and basically just kind of bullet points of my symptoms and how it was treated. And it was all, it was all factual. It happened to me. And the post was actually censored by Facebook, which was pretty shocking.
Well, we both think, I think it's concerning that we've seen more than one doctor be discredited or losing their license for talking about how they have successfully treated their patients, and especially when their treatments seem to be outside of the box.
Yeah, it really is. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to, talk more publicly about this, because look, I'm the patient.
Right?
I'm living proof that these treatments worked. They worked for me. They brought me back from very critical to, getting me out of critical and getting me much better. So, I do know, since I've gotten better and done a lot of research, there are other therapeutics out there and other treatments that have worked for others. I'm part of a COVID survivor support group, and I've heard a lot of other stories. So the way I was treated isn't the only way. There's, other stuff out there, which is really exciting too.
But that's good to know, really good that there's more than one way that you can recover. Okay, here I would like to ask you one more thing. Do you have any final words or advice for us that you've learned from your journey through all of this?
Yeah, I would say, from my experience, the most important thing I'd recommend is do your own research, get your information from doctors that are successfully treating COVID patients, as well as COVID survivors who have been successfully treated. That's a really important source of information as well. Have a plan in place, know what doctor you want to go to, just in case, God forbid, a family member, you get it. And you really have to be your own advocate through all this. You have to insist on getting the medications and treatments that you want to get. And also, don't wait at home until you feel like you need to go to the hospital.
Yeah, exactly.
The worst plan ever. Get treated immediately with these therapeutics or protocols that are, doctors that really know how to treat COVID are using, and that are working.
Great advice, Christy. Very good advice. And I've always been a big advocate on this. The doctors are called practitioners, so they are practicing. And my uncle shared that with me a long time ago. And once he said that to me, lights went on, because they are practicing medicine on us, myself, you. We need to have our own level of knowledge, I think, on every level. So if you have it, because they're our bodies. So if we get something from a doctor that doesn't sound normal or doesn't sound right to us, check it out, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's what we need to do. Well, Christy, I personally want to thank you for sharing your story with us. And I'm sure everybody out there was really happy with this. And thank you all for listening. We truly hope that you learned something from our show and our journey to health. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us. All links are listed below.
And also, we're going to be posting some of the links from the topics that we discussed as well below.
Yes. And we hope that you'll stay tuned for our next episode of Discovering True Health.